Anybody voted for Trump in here? No? Some? I don't think I would do it because my gut reaction to him is one of revulsion, because, like, I guess, but look, I'm not above voting for Trump. I'm a hateful person. His hate just doesn't match up with my hate. Mexicans and Muslims are not on my list of pet peeves. I just don't care. They don't bother me on any level. I'm fine with it. But if Trump was up there being like, look, elect me president, and no more French dudes between the age of 18 and 25 who sometimes DJ on the weekends.
My friends go out to bars to meet girls a lot, and they try to get me to go with them, and they always pitch it to me like, hey man, we're gonna go chase some pussy tonight, you wanna come? No. If you're chasing pussy, that means pussy is fleeing from you. If all has gone according to plan, you will have just seen a clip of me doing stand-up. I will have put in whatever I could find from my 8 years of doing stand-up comedy at an amateur level that I don't find acutely embarrassing and shameful. It's probably not much. You probably just sat through maybe a minute or two of stand-up comedy. It's funny because not my stand-up necessarily, but people every once in a while will tell me in the comments of these videos, hey Matt, you're really funny, you should try stand-up comedy. And I've mentioned a couple times in response, yeah, I did it. I did stand-up comedy for 8 years, but I've never really fully talked about it, largely because I just find it embarrassing at this point. But I think there are some luminous wisdoms and life lessons that maybe you can pick up from it. My mistakes, my grave spiritual error in choosing to do stand-up comedy. I'm being, hyperbolic for comedic effect. One of the tricks of the trade, but I also am not. I do consider it kind of a mistake. When I started, I think I was 20 or 21, and I went to an open mic having mustered the courage to sign up on the website for a Greek restaurant/comedy club a minute before the submissions closed for the following week's open mic. So I went up last. It was 1 a.m. or so. And luckily there were still people sitting in the audience listening, which is pretty rare to have happen. And I did really well. I got up, I was nervous, palms sweaty, mom spaghetti, the whole thing. I was a wreck. And I got up and I apparently pulled it off fairly well, the illusion of confidence. And I managed to remember the stuff that I had written down to do. I got a few laughs. And at the end of it, I said, well, this is my first time being on stage in any context ever. And a bunch of people came up to me and congratulated me and told me to keep going, to the point where I went out to my car and got in the car and closed the door to go home, and someone came up and knocked on the passenger window to tell me how good at comedy I was. So that was lucky. That doesn't typically happen, where you get all this positive reinforcement right off the top and you do really well out of the gate. So that gave me kind of the Pavlovian conditioning of stand-up comedy equals success and social approval. So I kept going with it, and it was a couple times until I bombed for the first time, and that is a rough experience. A lot of people that do comedy like to pat themselves on the back for bombing or wear it as a badge of honor. It's fucking horrible. It's one of the worst things that you can go through, short of violence or going through a breakup or something, in terms of mundane experiences that are available to you that don't actually do physical harm. Bombing on a stand-up comedy stage in front of a few dozen people is one of the worst things that can happen to you. It's terrible. It's terrible. To my mind, there's basically nothing redeeming about it, and that feeling carried over through 8 years. So it was this really crazy, heady mix, this emotional melange of high social approval, doing the big stand-up comedy thing, the material hitting, having hundreds of people approve of you very vocally at the same time. And the converse of having hundreds of people at times just stare at you with silent hostility. That's not it's really honestly not a healthy thing to go through. It takes a particular kind of personality to be able to walk through that unfazed. And I think a lot of people go through that and come out on the other side telling themselves that it's fine and that they're unaffected. But I think cumulatively, over the course of many years of doing stand-up comedy, going through that experience, the highs of super hyper approval and super hyper disapproval, and also being surrounded by other amateur comedians or even professional comedians who tend to often be pretty damaged people. The net effect is kind of this irradiation of your not to be too grandiose, but your spirit. I mean, the way that you socially operate, the way that you relate to other people, it gets affected in good ways and in bad ways. In a lot of ways, stand-up comedy was a great hang. It was, in a lot of ways, probably a little bit healthier than just going out and getting drunk, although I do question that because that was a big part of it too. A big payoff for doing stand-up comedy was just getting free tater tots and drinks and beers. So the whole 8 years that I did stand-up comedy, I don't think that I made more than like $1,000, maybe $1,500 off of the comedy itself, which is pathetic and a complete waste and a stupid use of time. Because sometimes it was worth it. Like sometimes it was great fun, worth doing it for the sake of doing it. Other times, I would say the majority of the time, it was just kind of miserably sitting in the back of a room, drinking Bud Light and watching people do their shit comedy. And I don't mean to sound arrogant because my comedy was also shit comedy, which I will get to, but it was just like waiting at this bus station forever. And that's a waste to me. I wish that I could have a lot of that time back. Maybe not the good times, but a lot of the just middling, mediocre, passing times. I have nothing to show for it. I have no money. I barely remember it. And at the end of the 8 years, I had a handful of real friends and a bunch of loose associations, acquaintanceships, and no fans, nothing else. Nobody followed me around. It might be different now because people are smarter about recording their sets, putting it on the internet, cultivating some kind of a following. At the time that I was doing it, I quit, I don't remember, maybe like 2017, 2018. People weren't doing that. People were just going up, doing the open mics, and chalking it up to some kind of metaphysical victory or a notch on the bedpost of them paying their dues as comedians. And it was just wasted, kind of mostly wasted energy in my view. I will speak only for myself here. So I wish I had that time back. I wish I had done something a little bit more constructive with it. And I honestly think that quitting the dream, the stand-up comedy creative dream, was one of the best decisions that I ever made for myself. And this is something that people get railroaded into with stand-up comedy and any kind of creative aspiration or dream that they may have, is it becomes taboo at a point to talk about quitting because you can't express those feelings or those concerns without people jumping down your throat for it in a well-meaning way most of the time, telling you that you can't, that your hands are now tied, now that you're committed to this path. It's some kind of great spiritual loss if you make a different decision about where to go. There's all this whole narrative about never give up, keep grinding, #grind, comedy grind, or whatever it is. If you want to be a watercolor painter, if you do watercolor paintings for 8 years and nobody gives a shit about your watercolor paintings, you can tell yourself, well, I'm just Van Gogh. I know he's not a watercolorist, but you get the metaphor. You can tell yourself that you're a Van Gogh, that you're a Louis C.K., and you're going to keep doing stand-up comedy for 20 years, and then at some point you're going to hit a breaking point, you're going to cry in a parking lot, you're going to look up to George Carlin, and the numinous lightning will strike you, and you will suddenly become an overnight genius success. But what are the chances? For me, very low. One of the problems with stand-up comedy is when you're doing it, when you're in the midst of it, it's almost impossible to be objective about your own material because you're surrounded by other mediocre comedians. Again, not to cast too many aspersions, I'm speaking mostly for myself. My comedy was deeply, deeply mediocre, not that good. I was really proud of it at the time to the point of being smug about it in a lot of ways. And it just wasn't that special. It wasn't that good. It wasn't that insightful. It was kind of a little mean-spirited, a little bit petty, which again is, part of the territory with stand-up comedy. but there wasn't enough meat on the bone there to really propel me into a position of anybody having any reason to take notice of me. But because I was engulfed in that culture of doing the open mics all the time and not that conversation not really being welcome or not being one that people had this kind of gallows humor about the futility of doing stand-up comedy and this kind of trench warfare solidarity with one another of we're just kind of suffering in a void, and isn't that funny, haha, isn't that cute? Not really. It's impossible, almost impossible, to remove yourself from that circumstance and look back in on yourself and say, this is actually not that good. There's actually a reason why nobody's paying attention and listening, and why I'm still getting up at 1:30 in the morning performing to 5 people who are thinking about their own material. And also, if you quit, people see you as a failure. And it's not just like you're a failure, it's you quit, you're a failure. You're also internally a failure because you compromised on something sacred. And life is not a Disney movie. Life is a series of discrete choices that have real ramifications and consequences. I still don't make great choices. I think I'm making better choices now than I was then. I'm more conscientious with money. I'm still not great with money, but I'm at least doing something that is constructive, that has qualitatively changed my life in a pretty radical way with this YouTube channel, with the reselling to begin with, being able to do something, put energy out into the world, not to be too woo-woo, but to be able to conduct labor and make a decision about how to use your time and to get an immediate reward for that use of time and energy is like magic to me, because for 8 years that wasn't the case. To have that as a point of reference, I think, is valuable. I think I could have gotten the point after like 2 or 3 years of just talking into deep space and nobody paying attention, really, nobody coming with me. Like I said, at the end of it, I had nobody. When I started doing the YouTube channel, it wasn't an overnight success, but I had dozens of people watching and messaging me, people that I knew in my life and strangers, telling me how interesting and cool the videos were, which is a big contrast from 8 years of stand-up comedy of dick all nothing. So I think that's like the big lesson is follow the actual success, follow the seam between the things that you're interested in and the things that are interesting or useful to other people, in which you can provide some kind of value, be it entertainment value or utility. If you can be of help, if you can be of some level of fascination to them, follow that. Follow that more than following your vespery aspiration, vague, dream. I want to be famous. I want all this validation from strangers, whatever. That path will get you here. If you are driven by a need for attention, validation from strangers, which admittedly I definitely was more, probably still am a little bit, then being useful to people is going to get you there faster than just vamping for attention, begging for attention, demanding attention, which is what stand-up comedy kind of turned into for me and turns into for a lot of people. They get up, they do their material, it bombs, they throw a little tantrum, and they go off stage in a sour mood. And that was me at the end of it. That's one of the reasons why I quit. I don't miss stand-up comedy. I don't like stand-up comedy. I fell out of love with it. I will say, if there are people from my comedy past who are watching this who are bristling, stand-up comedy people, to a large degree, are perfectly lovely people. I had conflict with a bunch of them, but not all of them. There are plenty of people who I definitely care about and respect and wish success in it. I don't have any plans to do stand-up comedy again. I don't have any plans really to do much of anything creative in that way, and I just have lost my taste for it. But who knows? Never say never. Never say never. Except probably never stand-up. Stand-up comedy, probably never. All right, thanks for watching.